Welcome back to the Modern Mom's Roadmap to Balance podcast. I'm so excited about our guest today, who is Courtney. Wow, Courtney English. Sorry about that, Courtney.
You're
She
fine.
is Courtney is a pediatric occupational therapist and mom, and she normalizes sensory routines for all kids to help them to self-regulate. And she has a passion for supporting parents. Thank you so much, Courtney, for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, with the first question that I ask every guest, what is
Mhm.
your definition of a balanced life?
Okay, well, that's a really good question because I've been working on it my entire life. But I think I really realized how to understand how to balance my life when I became a mom because I
Mm,
had so many things to balance. And so I think a balanced life is prioritizing what's important to you, knowing what no longer serves you and your family and your life and what does, and finding that balance, knowing that you can't say yes to everything and that you have to say no and not feeling guilty about it. That's what really helped me
yeah.
have more of a balanced life because I tend to be a people pleaser. So then I would say yes to many things even if I really
Mm,
wasn't sure I could do it, and then
yeah.
I would become overwhelmed and dysregulated. So now I sometimes will just say, oh, like let me think about it, and then I'll actually really think about it and decide if that's
Mm.
the best way, the best maybe task or commitment or whatever for me and my family. So that's how I've kind of achieved a better balanced life.
Yeah, and I think that, a point you made was you've been kind of trying to balance your life your entire life, and this
Yeah.
is definitely something that's ongoing because once we find like that perfect balance, something is always going to kind of throw it off. And so I think it's
Hmm.
important to remember that this balance is about flexibility because as moms were changing, as parents were changing, our children, in every stage, they're changing in different ways and they
Hmm.
have different needs or different wants. So our balance is going to be changing.
Yes, completely. It's going to be changing. And changing can sometimes change in your life can sometimes dysregulate the nervous system because the nervous system likes
Yeah.
things that are familiar, routine, predictable.
Hmm.
So realizing that it takes time to adjust, I think too, is also helpful.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a really great point. Yes. And you had also mentioned that being able to say no without feeling that guilt was something that
Hmm.
you had to get to. And I know that's something that a lot of moms struggle with. So, what do you think helped you to be able to say no without feeling that guilt?
Hmm. I think it's once I realized that I was kind of stuck in this chronic state of dysregulation where I was like, I have to
Mm,
change something. Like I had already gone too far into like the depths of dysregulation. And I was like,
okay.
I am kind of always on edge. Like I'm just always tipping over into this kind of like fight or flight or anxious state. And so
Okay. Yeah.
that's when I realized I had to start saying no. So hopefully for everyone else you realize it before then,
Mhm.
but for me that's what helped me realize or made me realize was that I couldn't manage and I was not happy and I was always on edge and worried and stressed
Mm,
out. Um so that's how I realized that I had to say no.
okay. Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like what was helpful for you is knowing that you were taking care of yourself.
Mhm. Yes. I had to put myself and my family first, which sometimes can be hard for me. I mean, I'm in healthcare, right?
Mm.
I'm a people pleaser, so sometimes I get satisfaction and it is rewarding and fulfilling to me to help other people and to do things for them or with them, but just realizing that after like becoming a mom that had to change because now I had to prioritize like
Mm.
my family first. And by doing
Mhm.
that, I had to prioritize and put myself first because in order for me to like take care of the family and function well, I have to make sure that I'm not overwhelmed, right? We say
Yeah.
that about moms all the time, right? It's like you feel guilty about taking time to either work or do whatever you do for yourself that makes you
Mhm.
kind of to help regulate your nervous system, make you feel calm and organized. And sometimes we feel guilty about doing that, but then whenever we do step away and give our brain a break, we feel like we can return and we're recharged and we're able to
Mhm.
be more present. So I think that's really important too, is to realize that. And it's so hard because every time like my mom takes my daughter overnight, I feel guilty. I'm like, oh, like I
Mm,
feel so guilty that I'm not with her, but I know that it's good for her to be around other people. And I know that it's good for
mm,
me and my husband to have time, or just for me to like get work done and stuff. So then whenever I see her, I'm like really ready to be present with her, which I think is even
mm.
more important because when you connect with your children, you're co-regulating with them,
Yeah.
you're present, and they feel safe. Their nervous system feels safe because you're able to be present with them and connect with them. And that also
Yeah.
promotes like a calming sense, right?
Hmm.
Oh,
So what I'm also hearing too is like if you do notice that guilt feeling coming up, you're not beating yourself up about it. You're,
trying
acknowledging
to,
that
yeah,
guilt and you're
yeah,
you're trying to acknowledge that guilt
yes,
and then be trying to like help yourself see all of the benefits of doing whatever decision it was that you made that was,
yes,
having this guilt creep up. Because I think what oftentimes that we can get stuck on as moms is like wanting this feeling to like never appear, like, oh, there must be
hmm
something wrong with me because I'm just always feeling guilty or I'm always feeling this way. But knowing it's, these things are still going to creep up. It's, are we allowing them to impact, the rest of our day or the rest of like the time that we have?
hmm
Because feelings are feelings, they're all valid. There's
hmm
no bad thing, or they're not bad and good, right? They're uncomfortable sometimes, but
hmm
when we can show up and be more compassionate with ourselves and with our feelings, it's going to go so much better for us overall than trying to judge ourselves for those.
hmm exactly. And sometimes I feel like social media can kind of make you feel guilty, right? Because you see a lot of
Mm,
positives all the time, and you're like, oh, well, I'm kind of not feeling so happy right now, right? And so
yeah.
sometimes it can be hard because we are so connected so through social media that we sometimes like compare, and then it makes ourselves feel bad.
Hmm.
But really, everyone, everyone is going through their own things, and I think that
Yeah.
it's good to highlight the positives so that we can spread positivity, but also know that like that's not always the case, right? Everyone
Hmm.
has their own struggles that they go through, and I think
Oh
that that
yeah.
helps too. And just like, not feeling guilty if you everyone's situation is different, right? Some moms stay at home and that's really tasking because you're
Hmm.
never off the clock. Some moms go to work and
Yeah.
that's really tasking because you're shifting your attention from mom to work back to mom, so I think that
Hmm.
everyone's situation is difficult, and so you can't really, compare yourselves. And I think you're right, like that guilt comes up naturally because we're mothers and we care about our family and our kids. And so I think, right, the first step is realizing I do feel guilty, and then giving yourself reasons as to why you shouldn't feel guilty, and realize, and then focusing on I'm going to get positively out of this, right? I'm going
Hmm.
to be able to recharge, and I'm going to be able to get my stuff done so that when I'm with my kids, I can be more present. At least that's what it is for
Yeah.
me. Hmm
Yeah. Yeah. So, can you tell us what exactly is an occupational therapist and what are they helpful for?
That's like such a good question. I feel like people all the time are like, what does occupational therapy do or therapists do? So it depends on the setting. So actually, before I became a pediatric OT, I was an occupational therapist in hand therapy, and I worked in the outpatient
Mm.
orthopedic setting. And so
Did you
I
say
made,
hand?
yeah, hand therapy. So it was like
Okay,
shoulder,
okay.
elbow, wrist, hand. Yeah. And I would
Oh,
see
okay.
patients after surgeries or when they had injuries, and I would make them splints and fabricate them, and I would do their therapy and stretch them. And I was an OT, but I was working in outpatient hands. So that was completely
Okay.
different to what I'm doing now. But the goal overall is we want to help improve function, so functional participation and everyday activities. So
Mm.
when you fall and break your wrist, you can no longer like groom yourself and take care of yourself, like you have functional limitations. In pediatrics, children may have sensory processing difficulties, may be
Okay.
neurodivergent, and so they need support in learning the skills necessary
Mm.
to function on a daily basis, such as following routines, and
Okay.
supporting their
Yeah.
development. Yeah. So it's different across settings, but in pediatrics, really like we're just focusing on how can we improve this child's function and support their mental health and help them connect with the world and understand
Mm,
how their body processes the world through sensory information and how we can appropriately find a way to self-regulate through that. So,
yeah.
a
And
lot of
so
OTs,
the
yeah.
no, go
Sorry, go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, I was just saying a lot of OTs in pediatrics that we work kind of from a bottom up approach. So we always have to take into consideration sensory
Mm,
processing, what a child's sensory profile is, how they process that information, because how they process sensory information impacts all of the functional things above on top of the pyramid, such as speech and language, motor skills,
okay.
learning, cognition, all that. So
Hmm.
it's super
Yeah.
interesting. I'm very nerdy about it.
No, that's okay. It's awesome because I feel like when someone is like super into what they do, they're one of the best people at it because they just want to consume the knowledge all the time and like know all the up-to-date information. Because that's how I feel I am in with therapy stuff and therapy modalities. Um,
Hmm.
so I want to talk a little bit how I found you. So you came up on in my Instagram feed, I guess like just Instagram algorithm pushed you to me and you were doing like regulation stuff before bedtime. And
Hmm.
so I thought this was awesome because I didn't like this is not something that I had found had been talked about. You were like the
Hmm.
first person who was really that I've found and I've seen like really talking about how we can do some stimulation before bedtime because I think for me at least, I had always heard you want to do calming things before bed. And my kids are not calm kids. They like to run, jump, climb, like they are physical bodied kids. And so that stuff never worked. And I think that there's a lot of moms out there who are probably frustrated with, I'm really trying to get my kids to be calm before bedtime, but all they want to do is rough play, rough house.
Hmm. Yes. Yes. I think that that is like common for I mean, based on like all the comments on all the posts that a lot of a lot of parents are experiencing this. And I do think, every child's different, right? And it depends on your
Mhm,
day, right? So I just think even if I get it out there that there's another way to do your bedtime routine is beneficial in itself because you don't
mhm,
have to follow the rules of the book of like, oh, it's bedtime, we need to calm down. Like maybe before we do our calming down stuff, we have to meet the threshold of which our body needs to move because maybe we were in school all day and we didn't have any after school activities or we didn't have anything
mhm,
that allowed us to meet that threshold that our sensory system and nervous system needs to meet in order for it to feel calm. So a lot of people were commenting like this might rile my kid up more, and some people were like, "Oh, I tried it and it helped." And some people are like, "I tried it, but then I couldn't get them to wind down." So it's like, how do we shift you
mm,
or how do we modify the routine so that it meets your unique the unique needs of your own child in that moment based on their day,
mhm,
what they've been going through. So movement can be so important. And I actually created like a little mini free handout that I've been having people download if they wanted to, just to give them ideas of like how you can structure it and how you can kind of problem
okay.
solve through it. So I can talk
Mm.
about that a little bit if you want to hear more about
Oh yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first thing is like connecting, right? So connection is key. You probably talk to your clients and everything
Mhm,
about that all the time is like, you know, especially if kids are at school all day and they're not with their parents who are like their main
mhm,
co-regulators and they feel disconnected,
yeah.
their nervous system may feel unsafe. So we always want to be playful and connect at the
Mm,
beginning of the routine. And then the second step would be like to decide if your child needs more movement. Do they need to move their body more? Like because maybe they didn't get to move their body during the day a lot, or maybe they were out and about and they were overstimulated, and maybe movement is not necessary, or maybe it could like cause more them to be a little bit more upregulated, meaning like a little bit more
mm,
hyper-ish, or a little more energized. And then the next step would be, okay, like how can I offer some heavy work, which is giving the body proprioceptive sense. So like heavy work, pushing, pulling, gripping.
Mm,
I love doing a lot of like oral heavy work, like breath work at night, because you're getting that
okay.
longer exhale. You're stimulating the
Yeah.
parasympathetic nervous system, which helps calm your nervous system. And it
Mm,
shifts it from like active calm to more like rest and digest for like when you sleep and when your body really needs to be in that calm state. And then the last thing is just like the transitioning. So that's the piece that's hard sometimes for parents, is how do I like transition them away from this activity? Which is actually
yeah.
hard for me because to explain, because usually I'm just naturally doing it and I'm like, how did I do that? You know, even when I'm working with
Mm,
my kids, the parents are like, how did you transition them away from that? I'm like, let me go back and like think about how I did that,
yeah.
because I just naturally do it. But usually I'm trying to like transition the object with it. So one of the things was like, how do I get my child to stop doing the parachute? You probably saw like the parachute was
Mm,
like the main opener.
yeah.
Everyone was like, oh, the blanket parachute. I have a blanket and I have stuffed animals. I can do that at home. And so I told parents, you know, like maybe if you want to transition them away from that, which is more of like a connection stimulating activity, we can maybe put the animals on the blanket and drag and pull heavy work the blanket over to the bed. And then
Yeah.
maybe we can do some like body squishes in the like body squishes with a pillow to get like that toddler or kid sandwich, and that kind of like transitions them. So you're not saying bye to the blanket, but you're using the blanket differently to get you over to the bed to transition you to a different
Hmm.
activity, which OTs, we call that like an object-based transition. We're not saying bye to the
Okay.
object, we're
Yeah.
transitioning with the object so that it doesn't seem like it's all done. And no, I don't want to stop because my body feels good when I'm
Hmm.
doing this. So yeah, it's really,
Ooh,
there's
I
so
like
much.
that you
Yeah,
said that.
yeah, there's so
Yes, that's
much
a
to
really
it.
great point that you made. Like, I don't want to stop doing this because my body's feeling good doing this.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think we get so attached on like the thing itself when we're not necessarily thinking of like our kids, this is doing something for our kids. It's
hmm
helping them in some way, which is why they don't want to stop. It's not that they don't want to stop because they want to get us upset, right?
Yes. Yeah. Or they're like being avoidant of going to bed. It's not that. It's like feels so, you're right. This feels so good for my body
Mhm.
right now. And that's really like the key and the highlight is like in the moment when you think your child is not wanting to do what you want to do, think about maybe how they're feeling internally, like how that makes them feel like their body feels safe, regulated, and good.
Mhm.
So how can we transition you to something different that's going to kind of help wind you down to rest your body for bed? So,
Mhm.
mhm.
Yeah.
I've been actually working with a company to do like a book on this, like a children's book.
Oh,
So it's
yeah.
not,
Yeah, that'd
yeah,
be
so it's
awesome.
very early stages, but I think it's good to have like maybe like the activities kind of guide you in the book, that and you can be an active participant, and then like it guides you
Ooh.
to the book, and when the book's done, like you're already there. So you're
Oh
like,
my
okay,
gosh.
you know.
That is so awesome. I could even see like multiples of these books. My
Yeah, like a
brain always likes
morning
to
book,
go,
a wake up book.
yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of, in the early stages. I haven't really announced that yet because, but it is something regardless that I want to put out there eventually, because I think that it would be helpful. And a lot of people have
Mhm.
been receptive to the information I've been giving about bedtime routines, nervous system, sensory regulation. So I think that it would be beneficial for a lot of parents. So just to like guide you, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you're in the moment and you're like, I don't know where to go from this with this, because I just I'm in the moment and I need those phrases. I need those problem solving skills. I need to know like
Mhm.
something to guide me. I need like a phrase to like retrieve
Yeah.
from my brain to help my child transition. So,
Oh, yeah. And then
mhm.
it's probably also different for families that have multiple children.
Oh my goodness, yes, I got a lot of comments on that. I'm like, oh, I just have one, so but there are ways you can modify it, but it is
Oh,
harder
absolutely.
to manage more bodies, right? More nervous systems in the room. Everyone's nervous system can change the way that we respond to each other. Just like when you're in the room with someone who maybe be anxious, you might kind of feel their anxiety, or someone who's more
Mhm.
energetic, you kind of imitate their energy and you become more energetic. And if someone's more sad, you might adjust your energy to their level because like as humans, we are always like adapting and kind of meeting people where they're at. So
Yeah.
super interesting.
One of Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about the nervous system piece? Are there differences in a child's nervous system versus an adult's nervous system?
Well, yes, a child's nervous system is more mature. It hasn't, matured because they're younger and it's
Hmm.
still developing. And even as adults, we still need to be cognitively aware of how our nervous system is functioning. And by doing that, we're in tune of what our body is signaling to us and our thoughts and really like taking
Mm,
what our body is sending messages to us about and what we're thinking and kind of figure out how to problem solve to meet ourselves at that just right level of regulation. But as parents, we need to be help guiding our kids through that because they don't really
mhm,
know what all these feelings, thoughts mean because their nervous
mhm.
systems are immature and their brains are still developing like crazy every
Yeah.
day. Right. So I actually have my Calming Kids guides finally coming out on Thursday, which is tomorrow. And in
Awesome.
there, I have a lot of like visual problem solving and visual like things that you can kind of see and then take note and use them as phrases to kind of keep in your brain and store in your brain when you're in those
Mm,
moments of like you see your child is dysregulated and you're kind of like, okay, I notice your body's telling me this. How do you feel? Do you want to
mm,
do you want to do this or this? And then how do you feel after it? It kind of guides you through it. A lot of it is like pointing out like I noticed that your body is wiggling a lot. Do you want to move your body right now? Should we take a break from this? And you're just trying to
yeah.
guide your child verbally through how they can internally check in with their body when maybe they feel hot or maybe they feel
Mm,
nervous. And so really pointing out what their body is doing and seeing if they can connect that brain body connection. And that's what we work a lot on in
mm,
OT as occupational therapists in pediatrics is we're trying to help children understand what their body needs. So connecting the brain and body, that cognitive piece to
mhm.
how the body feels.
Yeah. Which is so important because it's not really taught anywhere else. This is something that is a skill that needs to be
Yes.
taught. If not, we end up pushing those things away and not making any
Hmm.
connections as to why is my body doing this or feeling like this.
Yes. And the crazy thing is that, we learn about the sensory system in school, right? Like the five senses, but we don't learn that there are
Yeah.
three other senses that are, they call them the invisible senses, which is vestibular, which is your motion sense, proprioceptive,
Mm,
which is your body awareness sense, and then interoception, which is your internal, how you're feeling internally, like your stomach and, your heart rate and stuff. And when we learn that in school, we don't learn really or are aware that those things happen automatically. Imagine if we had like if our brains had to respond cognitively to all of those things, right? Our body
yeah.
is constantly adapting to like how we experience the sensory world. And so I think that that's a big thing too. It's like, oh, like
Mm,
I'm trying to evaluate an environment. What overwhelmed me? Do I have a headache because I was in an environment where there was a lot of sound and now I'm a little bit dysregulated from that? I think just being able to tune into like evaluating what caused your dysregulation and how your nervous and sensory system responded is so powerful and realizing that that
mhm,
happens automatically, but we can make it more cognitive by connecting and thinking about how things make us feel and how in self reflection. So,
mhm.
which
Yeah.
is a lot of
Yeah.
like my practice is like reflecting on how that made me feel and reflecting on like
Mm,
how my body responded. Um,
yeah.
yeah. So,
Yes. And I think a good thing to point out here too is our body will react, our nervous system will react, even if it's within our thoughts. So, like, if we're
mhm.
thinking something that is making us scared, say, I know we're talking about kids, but just
Yes.
money is a thing that came up in my mind. Like,
Yeah.
that usually gives people, anxiety or panic is when they're thinking about money, and your
Hmm.
body's fight or flight response is going to activate, not because you're in physical danger. It's just
Yes.
it cannot differentiate between you being in actual physical danger for your life versus this thought that you're having.
Yes, 100%. It's so true. Like, and I think that that's where, all of that comes into play of like understanding the nervous system, right? Like understanding, is this a false alarm? Like my sympathetic nervous system is
Mhm.
activating because I I feel like I'm stressed about money, so I'm trying to take action to help solve this problem so that
Yeah.
there's no threat or there's no issue. So I think that
Mhm.
you're right. Like those thoughts can trigger,
Oh, yeah.
dysregulation too. And,
Yes.
adults, we have a lot more to manage. I always think about like, oh, when I was a kid and when I was in high school, I was like, I just want to be on my own and, work and be independent. And it's
Oh,
great.
yeah.
Yeah. Right. But like you look back and you're like, wow, the simple days.
Mhm. Oh, yeah,
But
absolutely.
yes. But in those times, right, that you have your own stresses as kids, as young adults and everything. So there's always going to be stressors. And I think something that I've been practicing recently after studying more in depth to the polyvagal theory is like
Mm.
finding your triggers and your glimmers and like
Mm.
trying to focus on your glimmers and then learning how to understand how your triggers make you feel and then what you can do about it to kind of navigate that. So that's
Oh,
been really
yeah.
helpful for me as an adult. Obviously, for kids, it looks differently because understanding that concept's more complex.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, that's definitely helped me a lot with that.
Yeah, and your triggers is usually seen as something negative, and
Mm-hmm.
then the glimmer is more of what is something like joyful or good that I can bring into my life, that I
Mm-hmm. That
can
makes you
make
feel safe.
happen. Yeah, yeah, and
Yes.
that can be something that you either make happen or just it happened to happen and you noticed it in that day.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Like, how was I able to find safety and connection, whether I was doing something that I liked, that I knew felt good to my body, or whether I was connecting with someone who makes me feel safe and makes me feel like I feel that trust with someone, or,
Mhm.
because we always seek out other people to kind of help us reassure us that everything's fine. I feel like, especially when we're
Mhm.
younger and in like college and stuff, we're like, I'm like, was calling my mom every day, like, Mom,
Yeah.
I have to talk to you about this because you're like my safe co-regulator who I connect with to make me feel like everything's okay and to
Mhm.
reassure me. So it's interesting when you put it that way too.
Yes. Yes. So how did you come to switch from doing the hand therapy to, I mean, that is such a difference. Like
It
the
is
hand
such a
therapy
difference.
versus like helping children regulate their nervous system and figure out what is going to help them be able to function in life.
Yes, that's a great question. Because I mean, I always thought that I wanted to do pediatrics in grad school because
Mm,
when I was in grad school to become an occupational therapist, I worked part-time as a nanny with
okay.
a boy who's neurodivergent, and I loved being his nanny, and I loved learning all the things from all the different from his like multidisciplinary team, from his doctors, from
Mm,
his therapists, from all the different things that I took him to and learned so much from them. And I was like, I'm for sure doing pediatrics. But then during my clinicals, I was at Midwest Orthopedics at Rush, which is an orthopedic
mm,
group in Chicago. And I was a student there, and then I just kind of fell into the position because I really liked learning about the science and I
okay.
was really into making splints.
Hmm.
But when I had my daughter, that was when I realized
Okay.
I can't really handle the hand clinic. It's really intense. When I come home,
Mm,
I'm just too tired. And it was really hard to manage everything with my schedule. I knew I wanted more flexibility. And I also wanted to learn more because I felt like in school I learned stuff about child development, right? But not in depth. Like I didn't end up studying that and
uh-huh.
specializing that. So I wanted to learn more because I had like postpartum anxiety and I was like, oh, I was so
Mm,
worried about her development the moment she was born. I was like, am I doing tummy time right? Am I doing this right?
mm,
Even though I was
yeah.
an OT and I knew certain things, I didn't know everything. And that's like something that I do to cope with my anxiety is I need to learn more about it so that I understand it. So yeah, I switched because I wanted to learn everything that I needed to do to support my child's development. And it ended up helping a lot with my anxiety because it eased my anxiety because I knew that I understood how her development trajectory was going and like what I needed to do to support those stages as I was like actively
Mhm.
learning it as she was developing. So, yes, that was really the main thing. And then I ended up just really loving it because then I felt like I was able to connect with parents who I would see their kids and
Oh,
I could
yeah.
connect with them because I'm like, I know it's like it is right. I don't understand what you're going through, but I understand that this is so stressful because you're concerned about your
Mhm.
child's development and whether they'll be happy and calm and succeed and whatever in the way that you want. And so I totally understand that. So I felt like I could connect with that group. And then when I started sharing on my social media page, it just like the connection just really it just grew.
Mm.
I feel so connected to all these parents now, and it's really wonderful. So yeah, long story, but
No, it's good.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one, it's showing that I know both of us are still fairly young, but I think that we try and figure stuff out so fast. Like, this is how I want my
Hmm.
life to be. This is how it's going to be. And we don't like let things happen and fall the way that they're going to fall. So I know like one person might be hearing this different. I'm not saying like just live life passively,
Yes.
but I think it's more what I'm trying to say is like don't get so caught up in trying to have your life be perfect because
Hmm.
things are going to change. You don't know what you don't know, right? So
Hmm.
you didn't realize for your story, Courtney, you didn't realize that you were going to enjoy this side of occupational therapy. Like you had an
Hmm.
idea and then you really enjoyed your internship and you loved it and you were thriving. And then all of a sudden you became a mom and things changed.
Exactly. And that transition was
Yeah.
hard for me, because I had my familiar schedule and I knew my stuff and I had to
Mhm.
switch and relearn a completely different area. But yeah, you're right. It's kind of realizing that, things are going to change and life is about adapting in a functional way. How can I functionally adapt without sending
Mhm.
myself into complete dysregulation
Yeah.
or, and just and being you're right, being okay with where you're at and focusing on like the things that are good. I think,
Mhm.
that's super important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that you brought that up too. Like, how can I transition in a functional way so that you're not, right, dysregulating your
Hmm.
nervous system because our nervous system likes things that are familiar.
Hmm.
It doesn't like when things because it's not necessarily about safety in terms of
Hmm.
physical safety. Like it is, that's part of it. But
Yes.
for our body, safety means familiarity, whether or not that's
Hmm.
actually safe and beneficial for us.
Exactly. Yes.
And so
Because,
you went from one job. Oh, go ahead.
oh, no, go ahead. I was just agreeing.
Oh, like you went from one job that it took up a lot of your time and
Hmm.
which was working for you before you were a mom.
Hmm.
Now you come into motherhood and we have to adapt to all of those changes. But if you would
Hmm.
have stayed in that job, it likely would not have been good for your body or your mental health. Like that's not, yes, it's familiar, but it probably wouldn't be safe for you in the long run. Right.
Hmm. Yes,
Yeah. And so
totally.
being able to make that change and recognize this isn't, this is so different, but this is going to be a better opportunity for me,
Exactly.
for
Like
my
knowing long
family.
term. Hmm.
Mhm. And
Yes,
being able to guide your
100%.
nervous system to be able to make that transition.
Yes. Yes, it was hard, but I knew that it was what was best for me and mainly I knew because I was just in like this panic state constantly.
Hmm.
Like I just couldn't I just felt like I couldn't catch up, and I just realized that I had to make a change and I know that change is hard for me. But I knew
Hmm.
that long term it would benefit everyone, so including myself, my family, and even
Yeah.
just me and my career, and how I can help others and how I can support other families. I'm supporting people in different ways now, but it's definitely more rewarding for me because I am a mother and I have a family, so I feel like
Mm.
I'm relating to people and connecting a little bit more. So,
Yeah, so
yeah.
can you talk a little bit more about how you do work one-on-one with the clients you work with? I know I was reading on your Stan store that you can access through Instagram, that you offer like one-on-one appointments. Can you explain like what exactly those one-on-one appointments are for?
Yes. So the one-on-ones are really just coaching calls for parents who maybe like might see my content and might relate to it or see that they're
Mm,
like they're kind of seeing those same areas that they may be struggling in. And if they want to consult with me to maybe either better understand their child's nervous system, their nervous
okay.
system, their sensory profile, and things that might help improve their regulation, because I don't do like a full assessment. I don't, I only work with the parents. But I just kind of give them a lot of information on how
Hmm.
to understand their their child's unique
Okay.
sensory profile needs, and then, activities that you can do to help, and just building routines, building healthy,
Mm,
fun, engaging sensory routines in your day to help with
yeah.
regulation. And then if I notice that there's something that might be something that needs to be addressed by like
Hmm.
a OT, formally with an evaluation clinic, I do recommend that too. I'll be like, oh, like I do think that, you should ask your pediatrician
Hmm.
about possibly getting an OT evaluation, because I think it actually would be very helpful to you, because this seems more of something that should be addressed in that matter than just me educating you on understanding these things. I think that all kids and parents, like, I think that's just a part of development. And I feel like there should be like a whole course on it, because I think
Hmm. Oh yeah.
regulation isn't just for kids who are neurodivergent or for kids, who have other difficulties. I think that every
Hmm.
human should learn about their nervous system and how to regulate it, because a lot of us,
Oh,
how
absolutely.
people say, oh, everyone has anxiety. Well, everyone needs to learn about their nervous system to know how to
Yeah.
regulate themselves. So, yeah, I think that's so important.
Yeah. I mean, everyone has anxiety in that it's a survival mechanism,
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
it's not natural to be living in an anxious state continuously.
Constantly. Yes. That's that constant state
Yes.
of dysregulation that sometimes
Yes.
I see, and I say, okay, well, it seems like you might need to have more support. So you should,
Hmm.
check that out, with a professional, like in person. But I'm starting to slowly, like, I have some one-on-one calls still, but I'm slowly transitioning at least this next month into subscriptions on my Instagram, where you can
Okay.
subscribe for like $4.99 a month. And then it's all like
Mm,
group coaching. I'm going over my guide in detail. Like, I'll be recording things and explaining things from the guide, because the guide is like 60 something 5 pages. So there's a lot of
okay.
information, and like it's just a way to like have me break it down. I'm also considering doing some webinars, but I do still like to offer
Mm,
the coaching calls, because some people just want that one-on-one, or they just want to like connect
yeah.
with like a professional who might be able to better guide them, or show them like what path they should take and give them certain resources. And so that's why I also offer that too.
Mm, that's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. And so can you talk a little bit more about your guide? Because I know you said that it's coming out tomorrow, but by the time our episode is being released, people will be able to access this. So can you talk a little bit
Yes.
more about that?
So I made this guide because when I started posting, the first post that I did was like, does your child dig their feet into you? Do they push their body against you? They may need some more
Mm,
support. They may need more support in their regulation. Everyone started asking me about it. And I was like, well, I can't explain it all right here, right? It's just, there's too much, there's too many
yeah.
factors. So I started creating a calming kid. I call it Calming Kids Guide. I named it that. And really what it does is it explains the nervous system, understanding the nervous system, understanding how the nervous system, is impacted by sensory processing, understanding how those things impact emotional regulation. And it goes through, I created like a method of how to guide yourself through understanding your child's sensory profile, and then
Mm,
taking that sensory profile and creating, it's like an acronym I use. It's called NICE.
okay.
It's like notice, implement, change, and engage. So you want to go through those steps, and I have like a whole like visual setup for it in there so that you can better understand how to use that acronym in everyday life to either build a sensory routine or to manage your child's regulation or support the regulation. So instead of letting them get to a dysregulated state, you're more proactive and
Mm,
you're helping them, maintain and balance the regulation before they hit that dysregulated state by like evaluating
mhm.
all the different factors that contribute to it. So it goes through that. And then I also have like a bunch of sheets where it explains, each sense and different activities where you can stimulate that sense or ways to modify the
Mm,
environment to better meet the sensory needs in that moment based on the demands of the environment or the task. And then it goes into like resources for that. And then I put in some like sensory routine outlines. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. I could go on and on, but so pretty much
that's
what it is
awesome.
just all
Yeah.
these resources for parents to have, or teachers or anyone, because I have one with for classroom. I have like 3 or 4 pages on classroom. I have one for bath time. I have one for the restaurant. I have it all in there. And really, it's just like to have this resource for me to reference when I feel like I don't know what to do. And it's not expensive. I don't want to
Mm,
I didn't make it expensive. It's like I think it's $25 or 20, and then there's a promo code. So really
wow.
I want to make it accessible to everyone because I
Mm.
think that it's so important. And honestly, this is the guide I wish I would have had when I switched from hands to OT. So
Oh, yeah.
it's really good for new OTs, either
Mm,
whether they're like a OT student transitioning to like working in clinic or wherever. I think, it's just all the information that I wish I would have had just laid out for me when I transitioned. So
wow, that's awesome.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's like super, super reasonable. Yeah, yeah. And you
yeah,
said it's like over 65 pages.
yes, yes. It
Yeah.
is over 65 pages. It's so funny because I was like, I'm gonna be done with it on Saturday. I was like, at the coffee shop, I finished. Then I came home and I proofread it, and I was like, I need to add this in. I need to add this in. And so it kept getting longer. But today I was like, okay, I'm done putting in things because I can always, have
Mm,
other little ones to address things in more
yeah.
detail. But I just wanted an outline and a guide to just start planting the seed and understanding those concepts because when I started realizing, and learning about my own nervous system, I was able to help my daughter in her regulation. And I
Mm,
became a happier person because I felt like I woke up every day and my sympathetic nervous system activated and it never shut off. I
mm,
just was, you know, in sympathetic all day or just, on edge where I was in between calm and dysregulated, and there was a short window, right, where I felt like I
mm,
was safe. And I remember asking my husband one morning, I was like, so do you like wake up and feel anxious or do you wake up and you feel calm? And he's like, I wake up and I feel calm. I'm like, oh my gosh, what would that,
mm.
I would love to know what that feels like. And so
Yeah.
now I feel like I do because I finally understand what all these cues that my body sends me mean.
Mm,
And I know I can categorize them cognitively as whether they're threatening or not. And
yeah.
if they do seem threatening, I know my strategies that I need to pull to help me in that moment. And I'm not
Mhm.
gonna lie, there are moments where just I'm too overwhelmed, right? And we all get there.
Yeah,
And I think noticing that
absolutely.
happens, right, is still okay
Mhm.
because we're human. So we're going to have those
Yeah.
moments where we're just too overwhelmed. We can't control everything.
Oh, yeah, and that
Yeah.
goes back to being able to give ourselves some compassion versus
Hmm.
judgment for being in that state, because sometimes you can't help it. Like,
Yes,
I'm not gonna say no to all of the parties that are at this pizza place or jump place just because I get a little bit overwhelmed. Like,
exactly.
you could, but my children love going to the jump place and the pizza place that has an arcade that I am just my husband takes them into the game area and I see where the pizza is. Like, we switch off, but those are things like I'm going to get a little bit dysregulated in those places, but there's nothing
Hmm.
wrong with me for that. And the same for
Exactly.
whoever's listening. Like there are some things where you kind of can prepare yourself for. Like if you're going to a fair or a carnival or, things like that, or
Yeah.
Disneyland, right? Everyone is
Yes.
always talking about going to Disneyland. Those parks are overwhelming for
Yes.
children and adults.
Mhm. Yes, and being able to, like, kind of plan ahead and know that that's going to be overwhelming, I think is therapeutic in itself,
Hmm.
right? And instead
Yeah.
of being like, "It's gonna be fine, we're gonna be fine," like, I probably will get just a little overwhelmed, and that's okay, and that might even help, with your
Hmm.
regulation just by having that thought in your head. So,
Yes.
yes, that's so
Yes.
important to realize too.
And I think it's also like closing this like really nicely, being able to prepare yourself ahead of time. Like if you're trying any of these techniques or Courtney's guide that we are just talking about, it's not going to go easy peasy the first time you do it. These are all practices. This is something you need to prepare yourself for. Like there are no quick fixes for anything. And so when we
Mhm,
can come prepared for trying new things and just allowing ourselves to learn from whatever it is that we are doing, it's going to be so much easier to
mhm.
move through the difficulties and struggles so that we can learn a better way.
Yes, completely, you said that perfectly. It's so true.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Courtney, for taking the time to come and talk with us. If someone is, I know we've kind of like hinted to it all throughout the show, but if someone really wants to work with you or wants to get a hold of you, in touch with you, what is the best way of doing that?
Well, you can check, I have a stand store that offers multiple things. You can subscribe to my email list where you can download all my freebies, and then it has all of like my digital products on there, all my recommendations. There's also a place to book a coaching call. And then if you want to subscribe to my Instagram, that's directly on my Instagram.
Mm.
There's like a little tab for it. But if you feel like you still can't reach me because I'm trying to go through all my messages on Instagram, it's taking a long time to get back. You can always email me, and my email is courtneyenglish.ot@gmail.com. And there's a little icon on my stand store that takes you right to an email where you can send me an email. And I check that every day, and I don't have as many
Mm,
messages coming through on there. So that's another way to contact me if you feel like
awesome.
you really need support and I'm not getting your message, either through Instagram or whatever. Or if you
Okay.
commented and I didn't get a chance to comment back, that would be the best way.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll link all of that up in the show notes. So if you can't figure out how to get to our stand store, it'll be in the show notes so you can check there. But thank you so much again for being
Yes,
here,
thank
Courtney.
you. Thank you so much. It was so fun to talk to you.
Thank you.